Resources will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I ask unanimous consent that the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Hageman, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. The gentleman from California, Mr. Obernolte, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. The gentleman from Montana, Mr. Zinke, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. And the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlahan, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today's hearing focuses on pivotal legislation aimed at strengthening the United States natural resource policy. We will examine H.R. 7662, the Critical Minerals Security Act of 2024, H.R. 7807, the Intergovernmental Critical Minerals Task Force Act, H.R. 8952, the Crow Revenue Act, and H.R. 1005, the Expedited Appeals Review Act. These bills share a common purpose: to secure America's natural resources, expedite fair processes, and ensure intergovernmental collaboration. At this point in the Congress, we're all well aware of the essential role critical minerals and rare earth elements play in our economic and national security. And while it's vital we're able to access our deposits here at home, our first bill, H.R. 7662, the Critical Minerals Security Act of 2024, speaks to the global reality of much of this resource supply chain, one predominantly dictated by the communist country of China. For example, China currently controls 72% of the Democratic Republic of the Congo's cobalt and copper. Just one of these Chinese-operated industrial mines provides 12% of the world's total cobalt supply. H.R. 7662 would direct the Secretary of the Interior, in consultation with the heads of relevant federal agencies, to submit a report to Congress on the critical mineral and rare earth element resources around the world. While I appreciate the underlying idea of this bill, I have some practical questions regarding how the Department of the Interior would facilitate certain portions of this report, and if these efforts are already underway. Our next bill, H.R. 7807, is the Intergovernmental Critical Minerals Task Force Act, introduced by Representative Obernolte of California. As critical minerals are truly the essential building blocks of every sector of our economy, multiple agencies have authority over various fragments of the critical mineral supply chain. But this also means that identifying solutions for onshoring various aspects of the supply chain can be lost in a tangle of bureaucratic and jurisdictional webs. H.R. 7807 would establish an intergovernmental critical minerals task force to facilitate cooperation between federal, state, and local governments and industry representatives to decrease the United States' reliance on adversarial nations for critical minerals. This task force would be responsible for providing recommendations to Congress and the President on how to reduce U.S. mineral dependence. Next, we have H.R. 8952, the Crow Revenue Act, introduced by Representative Zinke of Montana. H.R. 8952 would transfer about 4,600 acres of private subsurface inholdings from the Hope family tracts within the Crow Reservation to the Crow Tribe of Montana. In exchange, the Hope Family Trust would receive 4,530 acres of federal subsurface and 940 acres of federal surface interests. The bill also provides for a revenue sharing agreement for the development of these tracts to be determined by the tribe and the Hope Family Trust should the minerals be developed at a later date. H.R. 8952 would also allow Bull Mountain, a coal mine in Montana, to remain open. This bill is a win for the Crow tribe, a win for the 300 employees at Bull Mountain Mine, and a win for the Montanans that benefit from the existing revenues and taxes that the mine generates. And I'm excited to have Chairman White Clay of the Crow tribe here today to tell us more about why the tribe so strongly supports this measure. Lastly, I want to underscore the urgency of passing H.R. 1005, the Expedited Appeals Review Act, which addresses critical flaws in the current Interior Board of Land Appeals process. The Interior Board of Land Appeals, commonly referred as to the IBLA, functions as an appellate review body within the Department of the Interior, resolving disputes related to public lands, mineral resources, energy development, and other natural resources issues under DOI's jurisdiction. However, the IBLA's process often denies justice altogether, as many cases are not decided but simply expire, effectively resulting in an automatic denial without any substantive decision. The IBLA has become burdened with over 600 pending appeals and has shown an institutional bias, affirming government decisions in nearly 90% of the cases just last year. This results in long delays and a process that deters justice. The Expedited Appeals Review Act offers an essential off-ramp for appellants, setting a 6-month deadline upon request for decisions and allowing judicial review without agency deference if the timeline is missed. This reform promotes timely, equitable resolutions, a necessity for stakeholders navigating complex resource management laws. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I want to thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Representative Hageman, for her leadership in introducing this legislation. Together, these legislative efforts embody a commitment to efficiency, fairness, and natural resource security. I look forward to hearing more on the merits of these bills from our witnesses, and because the ranking member, she's going to be a little bit late. When she comes in, I will allow her to make her opening statement as well. Now I want to begin our panel members, our member panel rather, who will speak on their legislation. I want to now recognize Ms. Harriet Hageman from Wyoming's at-large congressional district for her testimony on her bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's wonderful to be here. And thanks to each of the witnesses for being here today. We're grateful for your input and expertise. To state the obvious, there have been a lot of bad decisions made over the past 4 years by the current administration, which is why the American people decisively voted to put President Donald Trump back in the White House on November 5th. Some of the worst decisions made by President Biden and VP Harris have gone through the Department of Interior. They allowed our land management agencies to wreak havoc on our rural communities by locking up our land and resources and jeopardizing our livelihoods under the dictates of President Biden's radical 30 by 30 agenda. I just want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the American people for caring about our legacy industries, for caring about energy independence, and for caring about the rights of Americans to produce affordable and reliable energy for the world. I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify in support of my bill, the Expediting Appeals Review Act, or EARA, which provides an off-ramp for entities whose cases are pending before the Interior Board of Land Appeals, or IBLA. The IBLA is a regulatory constructed pseudo-judicial administrative court within the Department of Interior. It was created in 1971 and oversees the appeals of agency actions, including those from the Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, the Office of Natural Resources Revenue, and Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement. As of right now, there are 8 administrative judges appointed to the IBLA, 4 of which were appointed last year, with over 600 appeals sitting in front of them and have been pending for the last 5 years. Most cases are not subject to a timeline, and for those that are, the IBLA typically fails to rule, resulting in deemed, quote, wins for the department. As one can imagine, in an administrative court created by the federal government, the record is usually heavily redacted, oftentimes excluding important testimony and records that would be favorable to the appellant. So, parties filing for an appeal end up sitting in a queue for years at a time, paying heavy legal fees for nothing to get done, only for a decision to finally be made against them before they can finally go to an actual court to have their case heard. My bill allows appellants the opportunity to file a notice requesting an expedited appeal. If such a notice is filed seeking IBLA review, the case then has 6 months to be resolved. If the Secretary fails to comply, the case is automatically decided in the government's favor, but no deference is given to the decision. In other words, it makes the decision irrelevant. So there's no incentive for the Secretary to sit on his or her hands and continue to do nothing. The appealing party is then given the opportunity to proceed to district court to have their case heard before a more neutral arbiter. Importantly, it also allows those who wish to have their cases remain before the IBLA to do so if they so choose. The industries who have borne the brunt of the bad decisions made over the last 4 years have spoken in strong support of my bill, including the National Mining Association, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, the Independent Petroleum Association of America, ConocoPhillips, and the American Petroleum Institute. Again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here today to testify on this important bill, and I just want to thank all of those who have supported the crafting of this legislation, and specifically thank Mr. Travis for being here today to testify in support as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her testimony. I now recognize Representative Obernolte from California's 23rd Congressional District for his testimony on his bill.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to wave on today. And can I just say, I miss this committee. We don't talk to steering. It's not fair that they make us. No, it is true. I miss all you guys. This is a great committee, and I miss being on here. It's an honor to me to be here to present H.R. 7807, the Intergovernmental Critical Mineral Task Force Act. And I know I don't have to tell anyone on this dais or any members of our distinguished panel here about the importance of ensuring U.S. leadership in critical minerals production. We have so many technological, environmental goals that will only be met if we are equally meeting the challenge of producing the critical minerals that we need here in the United States. But I'm sure I also don't have to tell you that we are woefully behind in that mission. In 2022, the Government Accountability Office did a study on key obstacles to critical minerals production in the United States, and they came up with some pretty alarming data. They identified the limited domestic infrastructure here in the United States, insufficient scientific research, environmental concerns here, and also workforce gaps in the United States. If you look at the last couple of years, it is particularly alarming. So in last year, 2023, if you look at the 50 minerals on the USGS's critical mineral list, the U.S. is 100% reliant on net imports for 12 of those minerals, 100% reliant. And we are more than 50% reliant on another 29 of those minerals. That is absolutely something we need to correct if we are going to maintain U.S. leadership on this issue. Equally alarming to me is the fact that if you look at the 29 minerals on the list that we have accurate data for, if you look at all the minerals on the list that we have accurate data for, 29 of those are minerals where China leads worldwide production. Only 13 of those are minerals that are produced primarily here in the United States. I'm equally alarmed by the fact that between 2022 and 2023, U.S. production of critical minerals decreased by 24%. So this bill is an effort to rectify that situation. It would create—
Would the gentleman suspend for a moment? Ma'am, are you able to help us?
Not too bad. It was working well for a minute there. So this bill, H.R. 7807, is an attempt to rectify that situation. It establishes a presidential task force with representatives from federal agencies who, in consultation with state, local, territorial, and tribal governments, will make recommendations on how to address the national security risks associated with America's critical mineral supply chains. So hopefully the report that this task force would issue would be a guiding principles document that would help future Congresses in rectifying this situation. So this bill is a companion bill to a Senate bill, so if we can get this off the House this year, it's already passed the Senate and we'll get it onto the President's desk. It has broad bipartisan support, and I hope to get your support on that bill. So I thank you very much for your consideration. I yield back.
Thank you very much for your testimony. You're welcome back on Natural Resources anytime. And I want to recognize Mr. Zinke from Montana's 1st Congressional District for his testimony on his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of this august committee. I stand in honor of introducing H.R. 8952, the Crow Revenue Act. You know, as a former secretary, this is an example of big government overlooking the sovereignty of a nation. You know, looking at it, if you were in a county, you wouldn't have this problem. But because you are a sovereign nation, and we should honor what the sovereignty of a nation is, then it requires an act of Congress to change what would ordinarily be a very common conveyance of property. And unfortunately, or fortunately, this conveyance involves BLM, it involves a private party, and it involves the Nation of the Crow Agency. Because it's trust land, it also involves the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Interior, and a myriad of other departments, which probably should have no say anyway in it. So, Mr. Chairman, what this bill does is it simply enacts a conveyance between the three parties on a sovereign nation. The conveyance is all in the entirety within the Crow Reservation in Montana. We're asking, it's a very short read. We understand there's also from the Department of Interior on their review, there's a small technical change that has to be made, and we'll be offering that technical amendment during markup. But I appreciate everyone's attention on this issue because this is one of many issues among Indian country. And I can tell you, if you're a county commissioner, you'd be surprised of how much paperwork, exhaustive, different governments, different agencies have a say in what ordinarily would be an easy problem. So I commend the Chairman, Whiteclay, for doing what a leader does. He takes care of his people. This is a great example of big government, and hopefully this committee will do the right thing. I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Zinke. We will now, I'm going to now allow the ranking member for her opening statement. Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you, Chair Stauber. I will say it's very refreshing to be here today to discuss two bipartisan critical minerals bills. Both H.R. 7662, the Critical Mineral Security Act, sponsored by Representative Houlahan, and H.R. 7807, the Intergovernmental Critical Minerals Task Force Act, sponsored by Representative Obernolte, take common sense approaches to secure our critical minerals supply chains. Everyone in this room agrees that we must proactively manage the minerals that are crucial for our country's energy future. We all rely on secure sources of minerals that affect so much of our everyday lives, from our cell phones to solar panels. And we all want to make sure that in the process of procuring those minerals, we're keeping workers, the environment, and our economy safe. To improve health, environmental, and labor standards across the globe and to diversify our supply chains away from bad actors, we first need to better understand where critical minerals are and who controls them. The Critical Mineral Security Act would fill in critical information gaps by directing the United States Geological Survey to report on critical minerals around the world, where they are and what's being extracted, and who is mining them. And while understanding mining is essential, it's not the whole picture. Recycling already plays a key and growing role in our supply chains. I understand that the Senate plans to better incorporate recycling into the Critical Mineral Security Act, and I fully support that common sense addition. H.R. 7807, the Intergovernmental Critical Minerals Task Force, provides needed strategic coordination for our efforts to secure mineral supply chains. Despite what we hear from across the aisle, we cannot mine our way into mineral security, just like we can't drill our way into energy security. This bill brings together all the agencies working on critical minerals, along with state, local, and tribal governments, to coordinate these efforts. We need a whole-of-government approach to securing our mineral supply chains that looks beyond just domestic mining to international trade, recycling, and the efficient use of our minerals. A holistic approach is better for people, the economy, and the planet, and it makes us more nimble, adaptable, and secure as a nation. The next bill, H.R. 8952, the Crow Revenue Act, is billed by its sponsors as delivering much-needed revenue to the Crow tribe. While I strongly support the Crow tribe's right to economic self-determination, this bill is a bad deal. Right now, private landowners, the Hope family, own mineral rights to land within the boundaries of the Crow Reservation in Montana. In exchange for the Hope family giving their mineral rights to the Crow tribe, this bill would give the Hope family over 4,000 acres of coal-rich federal land in the nearby Bull Mountains. The idea is that the Hope family would sell or lease their new land to the Signal Peak coal mine, and the Crow tribe would share in revenue from the mine. A few problems with this deal. First problem, this bill should be understood simply as a way for a coal company with a flagrant history of environmental and worker safety violations to skirt environmental review by moving to newly privatized land. Signal Peak Energy has been trying for years to expand its Bull Mountain coal mine into the federal lands at the heart of this land swap, but courts have repeatedly blocked the expansion due to inadequate environmental review. If these public lands in the Bull Mountains become private, Signal Peak, a scandal-plagued company recently fined $1 million by the Department of Justice and sentenced to 3 years of probation, could then skip all federal environmental reviews and begin mining. The second problem is that, despite what we'll hear today, the bill doesn't actually require any revenue sharing with the Crow tribe. Instead, this bill suggests the Crow tribe share their revenues from the former Hope family lands within the Crow reservation with the Hope family, even though it's highly unlikely that coal will ever be developed. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this letter from the Aspaloki Alatis Alliance, an organization of Crow members living on the reservation, which says in part, quote, the Hope family would receive 100% of the royalties from the Bull Mountain tracts, as well as an unspecified share of the royalties from the 100% tribally owned Hope family tracts. The tribe would be required to gratuitously give a share of the coal royalties from those lands. There are also no requirements to the bill that the Signal Peak or the Hope family are under any obligations to enter into agreement to share the royalties fairly.
Without objection, entered.
Thank you. Given that Signal Peak is currently on probation with the Department of Justice and multiple former members of its leadership were criminally convicted of embezzlement, tax evasion, bank fraud, money laundering, cocaine trafficking, and firearms violations, forgive me for questioning if they would act in good faith in this deal. I look forward to hearing if the bill's sponsors have fixed this section, as promised in the Senate hearing on the bill, but I remain skeptical that even a fix would be a good deal for the public and the Crow tribe. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman for her testimony. We will now recognize Representative Houlahan from Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District for her testimony on her bill.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Stauber, and thank you, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, for, first of all, allowing me to be here and waving on, and for the opportunity to speak about this issue, an issue that is vital to our national security, to our economic resilience, and to our energy independence, and that issue is securing our critical mineral supply chains. So I'm here to advocate for my bill, which is the 7662 Critical Minerals Security Act, which is being marked up today in the Senate. The fact that this legislation is moving forward in both chambers at the very same time should underscore the bipartisan and bicameral recognition of just how truly pressing this issue is to the future of our nation. I know that the members of this committee are very aware of the importance of critical minerals, minerals like lithium or cobalt, and rare earth elements to our 21st century economy and national security. From my perspective as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, and as co-chair of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, I also recognize the profound impact that these minerals have on our U.S. economy, energy, climate, and again, I emphasize national security. Critical minerals are the backbone of countless essential technologies and industries that power and also protect our nation, from semiconductors and energy infrastructure to advanced defense systems. As our reliance on these technologies grow, so does the urgency of securing these supply chains. Despite the critical role of these minerals and that these minerals play, and the sensitivity of many of their uses, the U.S. remains alarmingly dependent on foreign sources, with a substantial portion of these resources acquired from adversarial nations. In fact, according to the 2024 U.S. Geological Survey's Mineral Commodity Summary, the U.S. imports between 50% and 100% of critical minerals that we rely on. And that dependency applies to 41 out of the 50 minerals that are designated as critical by the USGS. To expand on that stark reality, the U.S. currently sources as many as 24 different critical minerals from foreign adversaries like China and Russia, to meet our needs. This dependence poses serious national security risks and leaves the U.S. vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. Specifically, it makes our supply chain susceptible to geopolitical tensions, to price manipulation, and to export restrictions as well. It delays our ability to diversify and to deploy energy technologies, and it undermines our capacity to compete globally in emerging markets. My bill, the Critical Minerals Security Act, would first act as a step in directly addressing these challenges through practical and forward-looking solutions. The goal of this bill is to provide the U.S. and our companies and our allies with the data and tools that are needed to be able to diversify, strengthen, and secure our critical mineral supply chains. First, the bill directs the U.S. Secretary of Interior to submit a report to Congress every 2 years on critical minerals and rare earth elements that are our resources globally. This report includes detailed information on the entities that control these resources. Second, the legislation requires the Secretaries of the Interior and State to work together to create a process that helps American companies shift their mineral sourcing to more reliable partners and to reduce risks in their supply chain. Third, the bill directs the Secretary of the Interior to report to Congress on 2 key strategies. First, how can the U.S. work with allies and our partners to develop modern technologies for mining, refining, separating, and processing critical minerals? And secondly, how can we share those innovations with our allies and our partners? This act is a bipartisan and bicameral effort. It brings together members from both parties and both chambers to advance a solution that benefits the whole of our nation and strengthens our leadership abroad. I'm proud to have worked across the aisle to champion this bill. I deeply appreciate the Senate's efforts to advance it alongside us here in the House. And in closing, this legislation represents a forward-looking strategy or solution to one of the most pressing challenges of our time. It will strengthen our economic resilience, protect our national security, and position the U.S. as a competitive global leader, and a leader that defends labor and environmental standards in the critical mineral sector as well. So thank you for your time and for the opportunity to speak on this critical issue. I look forward to working with this committee and to my colleagues in the Senate to make sure we move forward this very critical legislation. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman for her testimony. We will now move in to introduce our second panel of witnesses. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the talk button on your microphone. We do use timing lights, so please keep abreast of those. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. At the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and the gavel will sound, and I'll ask that you please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. Our first witness is Dr. Colin Williams, and he is the program coordinator for the U.S. Geological Survey's Mineral Resources Program, and he is stationed in Moffett Field, California. Dr. Williams, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Stauber and Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the legislation pending before the subcommittee. My name is Colin Williams, and I lead the U.S. Geological Survey's Mineral Resources Program. As the science arm of the Department of the Interior, the USGS provides impartial, actionable science on the energy and mineral resources that underpin America's national and economic security. We publish official statistics on the domestic and global supply of mineral commodities, assess U.S. mineral resources, and provide supply chain analyses that inform policy decisions and federal and private sector investment. We also co-chair the National Science and Technology Council's Interagency Critical Minerals Subcommittee. Within this subcommittee, we have worked to quantify and model mineral criticality across all sectors of the U.S. economy. We first implemented this approach to develop the 2018 list of critical minerals and have continued to update the list every 3 years as mandated by the Energy Act of 2020, including providing opportunities for interagency consultation and public comment. We are incorporating new realistic disruption scenarios into the updated methodology for the upcoming 2025 list to better represent supply chain risks and their potential effects on the U.S. gross domestic product, or GDP. For example, using elements of the updated methodology, we recently showed that if China completely suspends gallium and germanium exports, U.S. GDP could be reduced by $3.4 billion. Working with partners inside and outside of government, we have also built analytic capabilities to identify and address supply chain vulnerabilities, and resource issues across the entire mineral space, from resource extraction to processing, manufacturing, disposal, and recycling and reprocessing waste. Through our Earth Mapping Resources Initiative, or Earth MRI, we are working with states and other partners to collect modern geoscience data across the United States and develop new maps and assessments of our critical mineral resources. We're collaborating with the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy, ARPA-E, to deploy artificial intelligence and machine learning to accelerate the use of our Earth MRI data to quantify the nation's mineral resources. Finally, we are developing the first national inventory to assess domestic resources and mine and energy waste. We have expanded our annual mineral commodity summaries with additional data on import reliance and recycling, and are providing support to other federal agencies for decisions on grants, loans, and tax code changes focused on critical mineral production and processing. We have also supported the administration and Congress on mineral supply chain issues, such as those resulting from China's imposition of export controls on antimony, gallium, germanium, and graphite. Turning to the legislation, H.R. 7662. This bill requires the Secretary of the Interior to regularly report on global critical mineral resources and operations, including foreign government ownership or influence at the individual mine and processing facility level. It also requires input on strategies to develop advanced mining, refining, separation, and processing technologies. The USGS supports this bill. Much of the information needed for this report is compiled in our mineral commodity summaries, yearbooks, and industry surveys, and can be consolidated and augmented in a new format for this legislation, although in some cases the level of detail required will be difficult to acquire for some mineral markets which are not fully transparent. We will continue to work to improve our ability to access this information. We have a second partnership with DARPA to develop tools to increase critical mineral pricing transparency and improve the timeliness and accuracy of supply and demand forecasts. Finally, the administration's most recent budget request added $5.6 million to improve tracking of global minerals markets and model the economic impact of supply chain disruptions. H.R. 7807. This bill would establish an intergovernmental task force to assess our dependence on the People's Republic of China and certain other countries for critical minerals. It would bring together multiple levels of government to make policy recommendations and facilitate cooperation on responses to this dependence. We recognize the need to address challenges to critical mineral supply chains. We can support the task force with supply, demand, and trade analyses, and as co-chair of the NSTC Critical Mineral Subcommittee, this subcommittee, as an existing body, can more rapidly stand up collaborative processes and deliver the recommendations called for in the bill than a new entity requiring organization from the ground up. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. We appreciate your testimony. And our next witness is Ms. Cheryl Lombard, and she is the Senior Program Director for Power Infrastructure and Minerals at ClearPath Action, and she is stationed here in Washington, D.C. Ms. Lombard, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Stauber, Congressman Whitman, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, and Congressman Huffman, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Yes, my name is Cheryl Lombard, and I'm the Senior Program Director for Power Infrastructure and Minerals at ClearPath Action. We're a 501c4 organization that advocates for clean energy, innovation, modernized permitting, and regulatory reform. The U.S. will need to double our power capacity over the coming decades to meet the expected energy demand. This will require substantial infrastructure, energy generation, batteries, transmission systems, and more, all of which rely on critical minerals and materials. The International Energy Agency predicts that the demand for energy-related minerals like lithium, cobalt, graphite, and nickel could grow 20 to 40 times by the year 2040. And today we produce very little of these minerals domestically. I will focus my testimony on 4 ways this committee can work to meet that demand, accelerate American innovation, and reduce global emissions. Specifically, number 1, the bipartisan Intergovernmental Critical Minerals Task Force Act. 2, the challenges with the status quo of relying on foreign minerals and materials. 3rd, recommendations to streamline permitting for domestic resources. And finally, strengthening U.S. and allied supply chains for critical minerals and materials. ClearPath Action supports H.R. 7807, the Intergovernmental Task Force, Critical Minerals Task Force Act. This task force, created by this bill, would coordinate efforts across federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments to address vulnerabilities in the U.S. critical supply chains, as Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez described it as whole government approach. This committee has passed multiple mining-related bills, including H.R. 1, all of which point in the same direction, align U.S. domestic and international interests. This bill would be another important piece of that puzzle. It is worth noting that the Biden administration has promoted numerous actions that have created challenges for domestic mining projects, prolonging lengthy permitting processes and limiting access to domestic resources while favoring those sourced from overseas. From Wyoming and Minnesota to Alaska and Arizona, the Biden administration's actions have made it harder to produce critical minerals and materials such as copper and zinc, which are essential for electric grid components, nickel and lithium, which are important for battery storage, electric vehicles, and geothermal energy. In contrast, this bill would create a unified strategic approach. It also includes recycling and reuse, and how it plays an important role in securing these supplies by creating secondary sources. Recycling alone cannot meet demand, but it supplements mining and will help to reduce environmental impacts. Today, according to the USGS Mineral Commodities Summaries Report of 2024, the U.S. is fully import reliant for 15 of the 50 critical minerals, which has already been said today by the members. Meanwhile, China has the leading producer of most of these. China also controls global refining for 90% of the rare earth element supply and 60 to 70% of the global lithium and cobalt supply. Meanwhile, the U.S. struggles to permit domestic projects. Data shows regulatory approvals for mines has fallen to the lowest level in decades. We must do better to keep up with demand growth. Federal permitting must shift to expedite approvals for projects that deliver net benefits and meet legal standards for environmental laws, including clean air and clean water. We need all regulatory certainty from one presidential administration to the next. This is especially true for critical minerals and materials projects due to the long development timelines. Legal decisions, such as the Rosemont decision, have further complicated efforts in recent years. The House passed the Mining Regulatory Clarity Act of 2024 by a bipartisan vote to fix this issue once and for all. Now we can do much more with this bill. Achieving mineral and material security for the United States requires both time and strategic international collaboration. The task force created in this bill will strengthen international partnerships, domestic capabilities, and supply chains while protecting U.S. national security and economic development. This legislation also creates jobs and drives innovation in critical minerals by streamlining the regulatory processes and enhancing coordination across government and industry. I want to thank you once again for this opportunity to testify, and we look forward to working with this committee and others to further American critical minerals and materials independence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lombard. And our next witness is Mr. Jonathan Travis, and he is the principal for severance tax at Ryan LLC, and he's based in Houston, Texas. Mr. Travis, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Congresswoman Hageman's bill today, the Expedited Appeals Review Act. This is an important bill. It does right by all parties involved in the use of federal lands and waters, and it does that by upholding one of our country's core legal beliefs, that justice delayed is justice denied. My name is Jonathan Travis, and I'm a principal in the severance tax and royalty practice at Ryan LLC. Ryan's goal is to ensure that taxpayers report timely, accurately, and exactly what is owed, not a penny more and not a penny less. At Ryan, one of our roles is assisting oil and gas producers with calculating the amount of federal royalties owed. Given the complex operations and lengthy regulations, disputes can sometimes arise, which forces royalty payers into the appeals process at the Interior Board of Land Appeals, also known as the IBLA for short. Unfortunately, this process is lengthy, costly, and poorly defined. Two key statistics help highlight that these comments aren't hyperbole. There are currently over 600 appeals before the IBLA, many of which have been pending for more than 5 years. In 2023, the IBLA decided just 36 cases on the merits, 2 of which were in favor of the appealing party, with 34 in favor of the government. That's simply not justice. In the appeals we've been involved in, we've identified 2 main issues. First, the department has often produced heavily curated administrative records, many of which have been ruled by the IBLA and have been compiled by the department in bad faith. Despite these findings of bad faith, the IBLA has still been unable or unwilling to rule on the merits of the cases, leaving the appellant stuck in the IBLA waiting process. The administrative record is supposed to include all of the documents that were compiled and presented to the deciding agency official during the consideration of the matter being appealed. Unfortunately, this is the exact opposite of what we've seen happen. Instead, we have seen Office of Natural Resources Revenue, ONRR, or HONOR as they prefer to be called, officials knowingly making decisions before gathering the necessary information. We've also seen HONOR agency personnel purposefully deleting and excluding documents that could inform the director's decision. Moreover, once the appeals reached the IBLA, HONOR frequently took over a year to produce the administrative record, the very same administrative record that should have already been existed before the director issued their decision. The flaw in this process is simple. How could the director have considered an administrative record in making their decision when that administrative record had not even been compiled yet? Unfortunately, the IBLA's process promotes this behavior by discouraging appellants from supplementing the administrative record and also making discovery incredibly rare. Consequently, the agencies alone have control over the documents that will inform an IBLA decision. And as we have seen, this allows for the exclusion of documents that challenge or refute the agency's desired outcome. The second issue is the IBLA's inability to rule on the merits of a case. On most matters, the IBLA has an indefinite amount of time to sit on a case before making a ruling. In fact, there are currently pending cases before the IBLA that date back to 2014. Unique to royalty appeals and ONRR is a 33-month period in which a decision must be issued by the IBLA. Once that almost 3-year period expires, the department or agency automatically wins if the issue is worth more than $10,000, which, as you can imagine, they pretty much all are. The appellant can only then go onward to district court, and the administrative record is now set despite the IBLA often having not ruled on the matter at all. Further, the agency is also given deference, again despite the IBLA having not made a ruling. And unfortunately, this automatic loss in the IBLA process due to the 33-month period expiring is the most common result for royalty cases, even ones that have been fully briefed. This leaves appellants in judicial purgatory because there aren't any mechanisms to encourage or receive timely resolution. The Expedited Appeals Review Act provides a crucial path forward, allowing these appeals to finally advance. First, this bill creates a tighter timeline for the IBLA to consider cases. Second, the bill makes sure that a final decision will be issued by an impartial arbiter, whether it be the IBLA in normal course, but on a tighter deadline, or by a district court, and now allowing for fair consideration of all arguments and the opportunity to have a complete record. And while my focus has been on federal royalty appeals, this bill will benefit virtually all users of federal lands and waters, especially folks with grazing rights, renewable right-of-ways, or even recreational use, all needing access to a more timely decision. I don't think the current process meets anyone's reasonable view of justice because everyone should have the right to a fair and timely decision through the legal process. For those reasons, I commend the introduction of this legislation and urge its passage. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Travis, for your testimony. And our next witness is Mr. Durf Johnson, and he is the Deputy Director of the Montana Environmental Information Center, and he is based out of Helena, Montana. Mr. Johnson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Durf Johnson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Montana Environmental Information Center. I'm going to split my comments and first address the Crow Revenue Act and second provide some general comments on the two critical mineral bills. The Crow Revenue Act would allow for a coal mine to evade environmental review, privatize close to 1,000 acres of public lands in the Bull Mountains, as written, not benefit the Crow tribe, as the revenue agreement applies to coal that will not be developed. Even if the bill were to be amended, it still would likely not address our concerns. And if the mine were to proceed, it would further devastate water resources in the Bull Mountains, a semi-arid central Montana range dependent upon cattle ranching. As the ranking member alluded to, Signal Peak is a bad actor that recently pled guilty to lying to mine safety regulators about violations of worker and environmental standards and is presently on criminal probation at the Department of Justice. That's the big picture. This bill would be an end run around the NEPA process. The expansion in question would dramatically increase the permitted reserves of this mine, and if that coal were to be mined and burned, it would be 375 million tons of carbon, which is approximately 8% of the U.S.'s annual emissions. As part of the land transfer agreement, close to 1,000 acres of public lands in the Bull Mountains would be privatized. This is in the heart of elk country, some of the best elk hunting in Montana. And because this range is largely private, The public lands are critical for that access, and that's why the Montana Wildlife Federation opposes this legislation. The bill does contain a revenue sharing agreement where the Hope family would share in revenue derived from the potential development of lands located on the Crow Reservation. This coal is unlikely to be mined. It's not located next to any mining. It's not located next to any infrastructure. If the revenue agreement were to be amended so that it applied to the coal near the Signal Peak mine, it wouldn't resolve our concerns because as written, it doesn't require good faith negotiations and the agreement is not conditioned upon the legislation's passage. The dominant land use in the Bull Mountains is water, or is ranching, and water is absolutely critical for this process. The mining that has occurred in the Bull Mountains has repeatedly caused subsidence, which dewaters springs and wells for the ranchers in the area. And Signal Peak has not willingly or been able to replace the water resources for those individuals. Based on these concerns, the misnamed Crow Revenue Act should be rejected. For critical minerals, these two bills have merit, quite a bit of merit, such as bolstering clean energy and avoiding countries with poor human rights track records. However, in considering this legislation, we must be careful to assure that mining is conducted so that it fully considers and mitigates environmental and human rights issues, and that we not simply focus on mining, but the full range of opportunities, including reuse, repurpose, recycling, and unconventional feedstocks. If the goal is more U.S. mining, then it must be accompanied with reform. Rare earth mining is more toxic, it's often radioactive, and so incorporating community concerns is absolutely paramount. Currently, public lands mining decisions in the United States are driven by the General Mining Act of 1872, a 152-year-old law. It doesn't take into account environmental and community concerns at the initial outset. A prime example of this is the potential Sheep Creek mine at the headwaters of Montana's Bitterroot. There's been extreme community outcry over the clean water impacts and other impacts that that mine may pose. Another point, we need to close the gap in corporate due diligence requirements, and this bill could help us get there. Failure to align our standards with the EU's, for example, will close off markets to our products, rendering mining and clean energy manufacturing less competitive. Due diligence de-risks mining supply chains, simultaneously removing entities of concern from supply chains and providing a premium for responsible mining. Finally, we need to focus on alternatives. Recycling is an absolutely wonderful way, and there's currently 8,000 jobs in the United States associated with it. Additionally, we're looking at places like the Butte-Berkeley Pit and the acid mine drainage for critical minerals resources. So with that, we don't need to compromise the American public for these resources, and I'm here for any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Johnson. Our next witness is Mr. Frank White Clay, and he is the chairman of the Crow Tribe of Indians, and he is stationed in Crow Agency, Montana. Mr. White Clay, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Frank White Clay, chairman of the Crow Nation. I'm here today to express our full support of the Crow Revenue Act, H.R. 8951. This bill provides an equitable resolution to the long-standing land and resource management challenges on the Crow Reservation and strengthens our future as a tribe. The Crow Revenue Act will transfer approximately 4,660 acres of private subsurface in holdings known as the Hope Family Tracts on the Crow Reservation of the Crow Tribe of Montana. In exchange, the Crow Tribe would transfer 4,530 acres of federal subsurface and 940 acres of federal surface interests in Muscle County, Montana, referred to as the Bull Mountain Tracts. A key provision of the bill requires that the Crow Tribe and the Hope family enter into a revenue sharing agreement for any development of the Bull Mountain Tracts. This will provide a crucial revenue stream for the Crow Tribe as we seek to revitalize our economy. The bill mirrors the bipartisan Northern Cheyenne Lands Act of 2014, which successfully addressed similar issues for the Northern Cheyenne. H.R. 952 offers the same pragmatic solution. It resolves private inholdings on a reservation while creating much-needed economic opportunities for the Crow Tribe and ensuring certainty for development in Muscle County. The legislation mandates a three-party land exchange involving the Crow Tribe, the Hope Family Trust, and the United States government. The Secretary of the Interior is required to convey approximately 4,530 acres of federal subsurface and 940 acres of federal surface interests at the Bull Mountains to the Hope Family Trust. In exchange, the Hope Family Trust will convey 4,660 acres of subsurface within the boundaries of the Crow Reservation to the Crow Tribe. Upon request by the tribe, the Secretary is directed to take these lands into trust for the benefit of the Crow Tribe. The land exchange will allow the Crow Tribe to consolidate our ownership and control of our own lands within the reservation, a crucial step in managing and developing our own natural resources. The legislation provides the potential for critical revenue stream for the Crow Tribe if the Bull Mountain tracts are developed in Roundup. With the expedited reduction of the Obernolte mine on the Crow Reservation, which provided substantial royalties to the tribe. These revenues would help mitigate the economic impact and support of the tribe's financial stability. The Crow Tribe has always depended on our lands and natural resources for survival. Over the centuries, the tribe has made supreme sacrifices to reclaim and maintain our homeland. Since the Treaty of 1851 and 1886, the tribe's land base has been continuously reduced from 38 million acres spanning Montana and Wyoming to just 2.4 million acres today. The bill addresses a central element of our struggle, consolidating our land base, securing our right to manage our own land, and benefit from our own resources. As a result of these land losses, the tribe currently faces significant economic challenges, including limited access to employment and development opportunities on the Crow Reservation. Non-tribal members, meaning non-tribal members, owners control large portions of the surface and subsurface holdings within the reservation, which limits the tribe's ability to manage and benefit from our own resources. The tribe has the transfer of 4,660 acres of subsurface on the Crow Reservation to the tribe is critical to allowing us to exercise full control over our own future development. This consolidation of ownership, combined with the ability to regenerate revenues from the Bull Mountain tracts, represents an opportunity for the tribe to address our severe economic and social challenges. The tribe has been denied access to federal funds, grants, and incentives due to the invalid debts being referred to the Treasury Offset Program, also known as the Do Not Pay List. This prevented the Crow Tribe from benefiting from many new programs created and funded during the COVID-19 pandemic, which it otherwise would be eligible for. Fortunately, my administration was able to clear this issue up. However, we will not be able to retroactively receive these awards. Restoring our economic independence through our land resource management will help mitigate these lost funds and strengthen the tribe's future, but providing much needed resources to develop our own economy. The Crow Revenue Act is not just a land exchange, it is an investment in the future of the Crow Tribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whiteclay, for your testimony. We will now recognize members for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Rosendale, we will start with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for convening this important hearing and for Representative Zinke introducing legislation H.R. 8952. The Crow Revenue Act is critical for ensuring the continued operation of the Bull Mountains mine, providing stability and alleviating concerns about its potential closure. Montana and its tribes rely on coal production from Bull Mountain Mine to sustain good-paying jobs and to generate essential tax revenue for government services. The ongoing efforts by this administration to restrict coal production in Montana have far-reaching consequences that extend beyond energy access for our state, the nation, and the world. In 2023, coal royalties for Montana state trust lands contributed $46 million to our public schools. Losing these funds would lead to severe shortages and force difficult decisions that can compromise high-quality education that our children receive. Moreover, this bill is essential for addressing the economic hardships facing the Crow Tribe. It's not just a land swap, it's a lifeline that assures the future of the Crow tribe, supports Montana's children, and strengthens our national security. I urge my colleagues across the aisle to carefully weigh these significant implications before opposing this legislation simply because of its connection to coal. This bill is much more than coal. It's about protecting America's interests and preserving the Western way of life in Montana. Chairman Whiteclay, thank you so much for being here today. It's great to see you again. Could you please comment on the ranking member's comments that the Crow will not share in any of these coal royalties?
Yes, those statements are completely false. The Crow tribe will benefit in the realm of, I want to say on an estimated $100 million to the Crow tribe, $10 million for 10 years. And that would significantly help with the Crow tribe, seeing as we had a 90% reduction in our revenue to the Crow tribe from the Absalogam mine.
Thank you so much. Now, $100 million may not mean much in this city because they spend billions, but I can tell you something. In the state of Montana, $100 million is a lot. Our entire annual budget for the state is $7 billion, roughly. $7 billion for the entire state. $10 million a year for 10 years to the Crow Agency is a large amount. Chairman Clay, in your testimony, you discussed the economic challenges faced by your tribe. Could you explain the do not pay list process and its impact on your tribe's economic standing?
Yes, thank you. The Crow tribe was unjustly put on the do not pay list, which is a punitive action that was not made for tribes, and it restricts the Crow tribe from receiving any federal grants, funds, or awards from the federal government. And we were put on there for the last 4 years, and we currently are off now.
Thank you so much. Mr. Johnson's testimony describes coal as a declining industry, suggesting it's unreliable for funding essential services and infrastructure, disregarding the fact that the Biden administration and radical environmentalists are regulating coal out of business, not natural market conditions. With that perspective in mind, how does your tribe plan to use the increased funds from this legislation?
The increased funds from this legislation will go to fund everything from the Crow tribe, from social services. The MMIW is ground zero. My reservation is ground zero in the MMIW. We had 78 search and rescues this year alone for missing murdered Indigenous, and it funds everything from social programs to the elderly funds to just about everything on the Crow Reservation. We had to do that because we did not receive any federal grants or awards in my administration.
Thank you so much. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here. Please share my greetings to Ann Hedges. I haven't seen her in quite some time, and we did a lot of work in the state legislature. You referenced the potential for a boom and bust scenario resulting from this legislation. Are you suggesting that the Crow tribe is incapable of responsibly managing its finances and preparing for future economic changes?
Representative, no. And we fully support the tribe pursuing funding. However, part of the reason that we're here today is because of what happened on the reservation recently, in which the Absalogam mine shut down. And it lost its only customer, the Sherburne Generating Station in Minnesota. And that was a significant shortfall for the tribal budget. Now, that's just indicative of a much larger issue across the United States.
Mr. Johnson, I have to reclaim my time because Ashley is gone, and now I have to yield back to the chairman. But I appreciate that you believe that the tribe should be able to manage their own affairs. And Mr. Chair, as you could see, Chairman was actually disagreeing with some of those statements, so someone may want to inquire as to what he was referring to.
I thank the gentleman from Montana. We appreciate that. And if we can come around to a second round of questions, we're glad to go ahead and reintroduce that topic. Now turn to the gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there certainly is some good work here today that we're able to discuss in a bipartisan way. I am sorry to see, however, that we are entertaining H.R. 8952, which I do not think is a good piece of legislation. It strikes me as more of a handout to industry that would come at the expense of the American public and our natural resources. And so I wanted to dedicate my time mostly to that bill. The Signal Peak coal mine, of course, is at the heart of the proposed land swap here. The company claims that without access to federal coal in the Bull Mountain tracts, the public lands that would be traded to private landowners, that Signal Peak may be forced to close the Bull Mountain coal mine. So, Mr. Johnson, I just want to ask you, Signal Peak currently holds the federal leases for that coal. Can you please explain why the company would be willing to give up those leases for this land swap to go forward? What's in it for them?
Representative, it involves their end run around our environmental processes. Right now, there is a court order that says that the U.S. Office of Surface Mining did not do its job under its environmental analysis for the mine, and that they need to go back and redo it. And that has significant implications on the ground for people. And so rather than addressing that and evaluating it through that process, what this legislation would do is basically remove that process entirely and allow for the company to proceed without those important considerations. And some of those considerations are, what's the impact that this mine, this coal, once it's mined and burned, where it's shipped to Asia and burned, is going to have on our climate? What are the implications for people who live on the ground and ranch and have water sources that are directly impacted from the subsidence associated with this mine? I'd love to see any analysis on the land transfer issue and the fact that we're taking close to 1,000 acres of public lands and making them private in the Bull Mountains. That's a big deal in Montana, and I suspect that a lot of people would have something to say about that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I want to go to Chairman Whiteclay. Welcome, sir, to the committee. It's an honor to have you here. This legislation is called the Crow Revenue Act, and I think many of us are interested in supporting our indigenous tribes, certainly in upholding sovereignty and in supporting economic development in various ways. But there's some debate about whether some of the promised revenues would actually accrue to the tribe in this case. And you laid out what sounded like a pretty clear, at least expectation of revenue sharing. Do you have a binding agreement or an instrument of some kind that you've executed with the family?
Yes, we do.
Is there any reason that can't be codified into this bill? Because right now, as we read the bill, there's nothing binding at all in the legislation.
Yeah, they're working on a technical amendment. Senate is working on a markup, but also I think that plays into an action of sovereignty on the Crow tribe's part, where we as a sovereign nation can come in and we're competent as a nation to come into agreements with other entities.
But without compromising your sovereignty, if we could codify the commitment for the Hope family, that would be a way of guaranteeing that this revenue would go to you. Why not just put that in the legislation so that we can not debate this and no one needs to speculate that you're going to be left high and dry here?
Okay. Yeah, and like I said, there's a technical amendment that is coming forth in the markup on this, and we do have an agreement, binding agreement, with the Hope family.
Okay, well, I hope maybe there can be some continued effort in that regard. Mr. Johnson, I want to go back to the environmental impacts. I don't have a lot of time, but the ranking member described some of the ways in which Signal Peak has not always been a good actor. And if we are simply trusting them to move forward in a thoughtful and environmentally responsible way without any environmental review, why is that a problem? And why are ranchers and local communities in the area so concerned about environmental impacts of this mine expansion?
Representative, this particular mine has lost its social license to operate. Bribery, lying to regulators, the list goes on. It's been profiled. They're currently on criminal probation, and they just can't be trusted.
All right. Thank you. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman from California. We will now go to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, as I sit here and I listen, I think back to the hearings that I've been involved with over the past, during the 118th Congress. Being in the private sector my entire life, this being my first venture into public service. I think what comes to mind as you talk, Mr. Johnson, is the EPA, people don't trust them. There's a lack of trust because of a lot of what you sit there and espouse, especially sitting next to a guy that it's his deal. It is the Crow Nation. It is not you. But you find that you need to interject into it to espouse the environmentalist problems or whatever you see. What I see from a private sector person and what I see from the motoring public out there is an EPA that drags their feet, that has every environmentalist out there sue crazy to try and stop every project just because they don't want to see something go forward. In this case, a mining operation is probably very much needed, and these people could use the money, and they're the ones that are affected by it, both economically, financially, everything. But yet here you come along to poke your nose into it because you know more than the rest of us, probably the rest of us in this room. And then I look down the line there, and you got Ms. Lombard there, great work, because what I see from the hearings I've been involved with is, sure, we've got a problem out there. What are we down to? 3 smelters in this country? And 80% of the minerals that we produce in this country, what do we do with it? We ship it to China so that they can process it in those great green factories they got over there, probably the ones you like. And then they ship it back to us at an extra expense, when we could be doing that here ourselves, and the American people could be making that money. By God, that's what we call America First, and that's what we showed the world November the 5th. It's time to get back to America First. Ms. Lombard, I loved what you have here. 100% of the 15 of the most 50 critically listed individual minerals are coming out of China, not even produced here. Because we got to go where it says, if we have a burning problem, somebody's gonna be in trouble. My dad always said, if a frog had wings, it wouldn't bump his butt. Dr. Williams, in recent weeks, we've seen the Chinese government introduce export controls on dual-use critical minerals. Even as the U.S. consumes these minerals at an increasing rate, aside from the bills being discussed today, what measures need to be implemented to assure America remains competitive with China in developing our critical minerals?
Well, thank you for the question. I do have to preface my answer with the fact that we are a scientific agency. We don't, we support policy decisions, but we don't recommend policy ourselves. However, there are a variety of things, many choices that the United States and its friendly partners can do with respect to critical minerals. There are, of course, the options of producing more, mining more, whether with a close trading partner or within the United States. There are technologies that are being investigated and developed to substitute for the critical minerals in certain applications, or to find, reduce the amount that are qualified or required. And of course, looking at options for increasing the reprocessing or recycling. There's a wide range of options out there, and we work with other federal agencies, of course, state geological surveys and partners to better understand what's involved.
We've seen stacks of recycled material. They don't know how to recycle this stuff. They don't even have a process. So, but I appreciate it. Yeah. I hate to sound negative, but I want to switch gears with Mr. Travis just because I don't have 45 seconds. Can you discuss the negative effects on public trust when decisions are not made on the merits, but instead determined by default due to procedural failures?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an American taxpayer, and when I look at it, you look at a government agency that just does whatever they want. You have no way out. You have to sit there for 3 years. You finally get to district court, and they've set the playing field. You don't even get to present your own facts. So I think any process like that, everybody should get to go to court and have a fair shake.
Much better said than what I said. Thank you. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Georgia. We will now go to Ms. Houlahan from the great state of Pennsylvania. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
The great
Excuse me.
Commonwealth of
Excuse me.
Pennsylvania.
I remember that. There are 4 commonwealths, and Pennsylvania and Virginia are 2 of them.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Rhode Island and Puerto Rico are the 3rd and 4th. Thank you very much for the chance to talk to you. I am waving on to this committee for the day to talk about some stuff that is really relevant to all of us, critical minerals, mineral security, and how we can be more dominant in the control of this and understanding where our role is to make this, our nation more strong and safer. And so specifically with this Mineral Securities Act, it focuses on international data and on collecting that about critical minerals. And it will be, I believe, crucial to making sure that we understand how to better onshore critical supply chains and peer shore, near shore, all of those things that we talk about. Given the urgency of these challenges, which is absolutely urgent, and developing domestic capacity for processing, not just processing things that we mine, but also processing the recycling, to the gentleman's point, what kind of things could the federal government, federal policy do to help overcome these challenges? And I'm going to telepath to you permitting reform. So could Ms. Lombard, you answer that question for me?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and for your leadership on minerals and also on permitting. Thank you for that question. You know, NEPA and its process is extremely important, and it is, in terms of permitting, is slightly misunderstood. For minerals, it is an important process. It just takes a very, very long time. And I think what we need to have is certainty. We've had a bunch of uncertainty, whether it's from administration to administration changing rules. And I think with recent Supreme Court actions, it is time for Congress to really speak on that. And I think, you know, leading with the critical minerals and the importance of onshoring, bringing back minerals, but we're already onshoring many manufacturing on top of the different energy supplies that we need to do. So we need to look at ways to improve our processes and still respect the environment in terms of doing that. And we can do that. And I believe, going back to whether it's your legislation, but as well as the bill I'm here to testify on, it's important for us on the task force to look at these. We want to protect the environment. We want to also speed up how we can get certain projects through. Those that have already gone through environmental review, those that are on disturbed land. We have to have a way that we can streamline how we do permitting and get projects that we need to be done faster.
So I would concur, and I think that there is a possibility and an appetite in the lame duck where we're sitting right now for there to be actual movement, bipartisan and bicameral movement on permitting reform, transmission reform as well. Manchin and Barrasso have one, I think, really good set of ideas on that, and specific to this conversation in critical minerals. What kind of specific permitting or regulatory reform would affect this particular part of our issue with trying to be more independent and also safer for our planet?
Thank you for that question. Just to clarify, are you talking specifically about the minerals?
Yes.
Or, okay. So in terms of the Manchin-Barrasso, the EPRA bill, it is doing a few things. It is, first, as you mentioned on transmission, it is clearing a way for potentially ways to have transmission built faster. Now, minerals are very important to transmission, so we have that. And then we also have, in terms of judicial review, it is putting certain timelines in there so we can speed the process along. I would say parallel to that, here on the House side, we've had the Fix Our Forest bill, which is now moving over to the Senate. It has some interesting components in it as well in terms of judicial reform. So I think the blueprints are there, but specifically for critical minerals, I think the judicial review side is what's most important that's currently in the bill.
And so with what remains of my time, I kind of want to foot stomp on the importance of trying to take advantage of this lame duck to try to move forward on some things that I think we can all agree on, and the importance of this particular opportunity is I think a real thing to make sure that we're talking about as loudly as we can. If people are hearing me over on the Senate side, and I'm hoping that people are hearing me on the House side, I think we have an opportunity here. But importantly for my side of the aisle as well, I want to make sure that we talk as well about IRA and IIJA, because it's important that there be infrastructure as well for any sort of mining that we do, any sort of kind of opportunity for transmission or permitting reform doesn't help if you don't have the roadways, bridges, tunnels, broadband, all of those kinds of things. Can you comment with what remains of my time on that as well? and what's helpful in this particular conversation.
Thank you, Congresswoman. In terms of, in my comments, I talked about the energy demands and the not only onshoring, but our advanced manufacturing, large-scale manufacturing, and mining. All of this requires quite a bit of electricity. And in terms of meeting our current needs and our future needs, we need to address all of those.
Thank you. I've run out of time. I appreciate the time and chance to wave on. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania. We will now go to the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Hageman.
Thank you. Mr. Travis, listening to you talk about the IBLA and the information that I have practicing in that area, it reminds me of the book by Franz Kafka, The Trial. You just never know when you're going to be able to make it through the Leviathan of that process that's there. Mr. Whiteclay, I'm looking forward to the excitement of the development that you're looking at. Coal is the energy of the future, and I think that this is a fabulous opportunity for your tribes. So I want to thank Mr. Zinke for the work that he's done on that bill, the important bill for your tribe and your tribal members. Mr. Travis, thank you so much for being here and for being so supportive of this important legislation. I know that you've had to work with a lot of people whose cases have been stuck in front of the IBLA at their expense, and I appreciate the good work you've been doing on this, and we're grateful to have you here today. Have your clients had to pay significant legal fees while they wait for their cases to be taken up? And what have you observed regarding the personal and financial cost of the IBLA's broken process?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. Legal fees are expensive, especially when you're talking about a minimum of 3 years that you're before they have an IBLA before you can get out to district court. So yes, the legal fees are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and folks are just stuck in that process.
And there's no consequence, no accountability from the agency itself for forcing people into that kind of a never-ending doom loop, is there?
No, and we've actually gotten documentation from the agency that that's one of their strategies. So the agency will say, let's just get this, let's make a decision, because we know when they get to IBLA, it'll be stuck there for 3 years and they won't get a decision. So agencies use that.
Wow, what a broken process. What an absolute broken process. And so contrary to our form of government. The IBLA claims to resolve a significant number of cases each year, about 270, which would be about 22 cases per month. And according to your testimony, but is the IBLA misleading people regarding these claims? And if so, how are they doing that?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction to be made there between resolving claims and deciding claims on the merits. So, as I mentioned, the IBLA has over 600 cases before it. They decided just 36 on merits. So, if they were to decide all the cases on the merits, we're looking at about 20 years to get out of that process. The cases that you mentioned that they decide, that 200 number, are on technicalities, on things like not filing in time, not paying a fee in time, things like that, not on the actual merits of a case.
So it sounds like we've got a lot of problems with the IBLA, and my bill is to address some of them specifically related to the time constraint. Are there other ways in which we need to try to fix the ABLA if it's actually going to be a functioning adjudicatory body?
Yeah, I think any time you've got a body that is statutorily constructed instead of through the normal legal process, you're going to have problems. Essentially, you're hoping that an agency created by the government is going to rule fairly between the government and another party. And so I do think broad reform is needed there across the board.
So my experience has been with ALJs as well, and the SEC and FTC are two agencies that are very abusive in terms of using ALJs. I think that they have a 95% plus success rate in front of their independent ALJs, while maybe a 60 to 65% success rate in front of an Article III court. And I think you really just hit the nail on the head. Sometimes we look at reform and we think that we can fix this, but the reality is that these supposedly intentionally independent agencies or appellate adjudicatory bodies are actually extremely biased towards the agency that they allegedly oversee. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I think so, and I think we see that not just in federal government, but in state government as well. I can tell you my experience in practicing in the other states is before an ALJ, you're likely to lose 90+% of the time.
That's right.
When you actually get to court, if you get a fair shake at a de novo review, your odds are 50-50.
So just going back to the brass tacks of what that means is that the IBLA and these ALJs really are a violation of the fundamental constitutional right to due process, because you're not getting due process. You're having to take your appeal to the very agency that made the decision in the first place. And I think that this speaks to a broader issue in terms of regulatory reform across the board, which is getting quite a bit of airplay since the election. But the reality is that we've stacked the deck against the citizens and businesses of this country, and we've stacked it in favor of a federal government that's too powerful, too big, too expensive, too much willing to go into debt, and too ready to do the kind of deficit spending that we've seen over the last 20 years especially. So I think this is an important discussion. This bill is an important first start. Thank you for being here to testify on it, and with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming. We'll now go to the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner.
Thank you, Chairman. Critical minerals are essential for our economy and are increasingly found in everything from mobile phones to medical equipment. And thanks to the CHIPS and Science Act and the Inflation Reduction Act passed by congressional Democrats, we are manufacturing more in America again, which means that our need for access to critical minerals is only increasing. New factory construction is growing at a faster rate than probably at any time in my lifetime in the United States. We are bringing back semiconductor manufacturing. We are building windmills. We are doing all sorts of things that require access to critical minerals. And as this country continues to expand jobs and advanced technologies and manufacturing, we need access to a reliable and sustainable supply of these minerals. But at the same time, where they come from and how they are produced does matter. And without proper planning and monitoring and oversight, production of critical minerals can become dominated by foreign nations who are adversarial to the United States, or by companies operating in the United States that do not have adequate concern for environmental impact, labor standards, and the like. And so we have got to figure out a better way to work together to improve our critical mineral supply chain and increase production, but do it in a way that is sustainable and fair and minimizes negative impacts. Now, Dr. Williams, I'll ask you first. Recently, a number of voluntary mining standards have been adopted by mining associations in countries like Canada, Australia, Argentina, a number of the international associations as well. These standards set goals regarding water use, greenhouse gas emissions, community development, health and safety on the workplace, and they allow customers and end users to know that their minerals in their products were mined sustainably. There's been talk about a single international consolidated mining standard initiative. Can you just talk from your point of view, your agency's point of view, the usefulness of some sort of a international standard to track, monitor, set targets around sustainability in mining?
Thank you for the question. Within the minerals commodity world, we work a lot with international standards or relatively compatible national standards that come to address questions about mineral resources and reserves, the reporting that's required about what material you have in a mine and how much material there is, and those are professional statements that are reported for publicly traded companies, for example, so that the people who are working, whether it's USGS, understanding the global resource picture, or individual investors in the marketplace, know there's a certain reliability on that information. And from that perspective, as these other aspects become more important in the broader community, whether it's environmental aspects, community engagement, protections for workers and worker safety, if there are consistent reporting procedures and compliance procedures across countries, however that is implemented, we don't have a perspective on the actual details, but I think it would assist the market as a whole and the community as a whole.
Well, I think it's very important that there be reputable third-party actors, whether they are associations or government organizations, that are actually doing the monitoring and overseeing the reporting of data, because if everyone's kind of reporting their own data however they want, it's very hard to get accurate apples-to-apples comparisons. And I'd love for us to do more to make a data available to end users as well, so that I know when I go to buy my next phone, what's in it and where it comes from. Ms. Lombard, I'm curious for your perspective on the same thing as well. How do we strengthen and sort of tighten up reporting requirements and standards across the mining industry?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. And I recently moved, well, a year ago, moved from Arizona, where I worked very closely on bringing TSMC to Arizona. So I know as a state, we're very excited about the reshoring of chip manufacturing in the United States and that partnership. Specific to your question, that's why I'm excited to be here in support of the Intergovernmental Critical Minerals Task Force. It goes to some of your question about how, the committee itself or the task force can, and I'll quote from it, make recommendations to secure United States and global supply chains for critical minerals. In going to your question about global supply chains, we can make those recommendations, or the committee can make those recommendations, so that we can identify where these minerals are coming from and so forth, and also potentially looking at those environmental standards.
Thank you. I'm out of time, so I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Rhode Island. I now recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Zinke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the first question goes to Mr. Johnson. And Ms. Johnson, I'm just reading your bio. Your bio states you're a policy advocate, attorney, lobbyist, and works to address the climate crisis by holding the fossil fuel industry accountable and to transition the energy system to cleaner sources. Is that correct?
Representative, it should be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And also, you hold a certificate from the Natural Resources Conflict Resolution from the Center of Natural Resources and Environmental Policy. You hold a certificate?
Yeah.
Do you hold a degree in any science? Any field of science?
Representative, I work with a lot
yes,
of
yes or no.
experts.
Do you hold a degree in any field in science?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
No.
Have you done any work in treaties, particularly Indian treaties? Because you are an attorney, you're a member of the bar in good standing. Have you done any work in treaties?
I have done some work with treaties, and I'm a little bit familiar with them, but I
Are
wouldn't
you
consider
familiar with the Crow
myself an
treaties?
expert. No, I am not.
Well, actually, there's two, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to bring to the attention of the committees. There's 1851 and 1868. And the preamble is to provide for the Crow people sufficient lands to continue their way of life. The document is signed by the United States government and the Indian nation, and there is a question of sovereignty. So I'm amazed during the hearing here that the efficacy, the integrity of Signal Peak somehow is relevant to this discussion. I contend it is not. They are a sovereign nation. If they want to make a deal with Disneyland, they have that right as a sovereign nation. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask you, do you also hold the same opinion?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, have you ever taken a tour of Bull Mountain?
Representative, I've never been invited.
Because in your testimony, you said the elk were sensitive to Bull Mountain. I know you don't have a degree in science, but how would that be since Bull Mountain is an underground mine about 800 feet below the surface?
Representative, I'd encourage you to just take a look at my testimony. It wasn't that the elk are sensitive to the underground mine. It was that people enjoy hunting elk in Montana, in particular on our public lands, and this particular legislation would take public lands close to 1,000 acres that people do hunt elk on. I know people that go up there and do it, and privatize them. And that's the major concern associated with this legislation, is the privatization of the public lands in the Bull Mountains. In terms of the Crow sovereignty...
Let me ask you this. The privatization, they're most from mineral rights, right? Subsurface mineral rights. Is that true, Mr. Chairman? Can I ask you that?
Yes.
So subsurface mineral rights at 800 feet. How does that affect surface hunting and fishing, just out of curiosity? And Mr. Chairman, I'd like you to answer that. Does it affect surface hunting, fishing, and on the reservation, sir?
No, it does not.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Montana. We will now go to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Kamlager Dove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. Now, I fully respect the Crow tribe's need for new sources of revenue and firmly believe we can and should do more to help communities across the country, especially tribal communities, that are losing revenue from the decline of certain resources like coal. However, I'm concerned that this bill, as written, does not deliver on its sponsors' promises. We have heard that the Crow tribe will share in revenue from the Bull Mountain tracts, that is from Signal Peak's mine, once the land swap goes through. However, as written, the bill instead calls for the Hope family, the private landowners who would relinquish their mineral rights to the tribe, to share in revenues from any future development of the tribally owned coal. We have heard that a technical fix is a-comin'. So the Crow tribe will indeed share in revenues from the Bull Mountain mine when the technical fix comes. Even if that happens, I actually remain skeptical that this bill will generate revenue for the tribe. And while I respect Chairman Whiteclay's negotiations for the tribe, we are talking about trading public lands and revenues, and I would be more comfortable with legislative guarantees. So, Mr. Johnson, does this bill as written guarantee revenue sharing, and if so, how?
Representative, it does not. And I want to be clear here. The land exchange that's currently occurring on the Crow tribe is a wonderful thing, and they should take possession of those lands. The problem is the public lands that would be given away in the Bull Mountains, close to 1,000 acres, both mineral and surface, about 4,000 mineral acres and 1,000 surface acres of lands in the Bull Mountains. Now, the way that the revenue sharing agreement is currently written, it states that the Crow tribe would share in revenue from the Hope family tracts. Those are the coal resources that are located on the Crow reservation. How it should probably read is that they would share in the Signal Peak tracts, the revenue sharing agreement, and that would allow for potentially some revenue to go to the tribe. However, as we've already sort of heard
But
today—
you said potentially, so that's not guaranteed.
That's correct, Representative, and that's because, as written, the revenue sharing agreement is not a condition of the lands transfer. There's no requirement that the negotiations occur in good faith. There's no requirement that revenue actually be part of this legislation. And that's one of our major concerns here, is we don't actually know whether this is going to occur. There's no agreement that's been made public that the American public can see to determine whether or not this is actually a good deal. And the impacts are really enormous in terms of this mine. Water quality impacts, transfer of public lands, and so in the sum of all those things, and without that revenue sharing agreement information, we're opposed to this legislation.
So, Mr. Johnson, what I heard you say, and please correct me if I've misheard, there's no requirement of revenue sharing, there's no guarantee of revenue sharing, and there's also no transparency that revenue sharing would happen and how it would happen. No transparency for both either the Crow tribe or for the public. Is that correct?
Representative, that's correct. The legislation will pass, and if at some point in time in the future a revenue sharing agreement is entered into, the only requirement in this bill is that it be sent to the secretary to basically be filed away.
Mm-hmm.
That's not confirmation that this is actually a revenue sharing agreement. That's not transparency for the American public. We're talking about giving away public mineral resources and public lands. What's the deal, and is it worth it? That's the answer that needs to be opened up so that the public can see.
Yeah, so you said, is it worth it? So can you expand on some of the local impacts of the mine to the environment so we have a better sense of if it is worth it?
Representative, in Montana, cattle ranching is a big deal, and in order to do that, you need access to water. Water is incredibly critical, and this mine, through its processes, has devastated the water supply in the Bull Mountains because of the undermining that occurs It basically fractures and subsides the lands and dewaters the springs and the wells that ranchers have depended upon for generations to run their operations. And if this mine proceeds with this agreement, that's what we're going to have more of. It's going to be exacerbated. In addition to the climate issues, in addition to the public land transfer issues, this legislation is just a step too far.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
I thank the gentlewoman from California. We now go to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all of you being here today for the hearing. I'm sure many of you have seen the stores have jumped straight from Thanksgiving into Christmas, and so apparently we're already in Christmas season here, and it reminds me that here we are at Christmas season, and this is the only year. This is the first year, the only year. Hey, Santa Claus is real, just want to be clear. The only year that we have not had a lease sale for offshore energy, okay? This is the only year since offshore energy lease sales have taken place, we have not had one. So what it does is it creates uncertainty in the energy sector for what the future of energy production is going to be. It creates uncertainty. You have issues where when you create uncertainty, it creates lack of investment. But global demand for energy doesn't decrease just because supply is decreasing. What happens is it gets filled by different places. And so, for example, there were studies that were done that found that Russia this year alone is projected to profit an additional $112 billion. Let me say that number again. Russia will profit an additional $112 billion by filling the global void with their energy. It is predicted or projected that Iran last year alone profited an additional $53 billion, that Venezuela last month increased their exports of energy by 65%. Mr. Johnson, I know that in your testimony you cite ESG and you cite how European countries are using environmental and social governance criteria to look at how they're getting their energy sources, and I think sort of suggesting the United States needs to put more scrutiny. But where I struggle is that right now the European Union is importing somewhere, if I recall, between 15 and 20% of their gas from Russia. According to the National Energy Technology Labs, the United States natural gas, LNG, exported to Europe has a 42% lower emissions profile over its life. So I guess I'm struggling when you're telling us to act like Europe, whenever Europe is acting like idiots. And let me just put a face on it. If we had taken 1 year of Russian gas supplies to the European Union, 1 year, the year the Ukrainian war started, we would have reduced global emissions. Ready for the number? 218 million tons. So help me understand how that makes sense.
Representative, I think that the main thing that we need to be thinking about here is the opportunity that we have with ESG and in making sure that our supply chains are actually something that can work for the American people and for American manufacturing.
Fantastic. So let me go ahead and stop you right there. Thank you, and because you're making my next point. So we're talking about supply chains. Great. Look at that. I just found this poster sitting right here. Look at that. So, Mr. Johnson, this shows the critical minerals and where we're bringing them in from. We have an administration that's energy strategy, and I've said this over and over again, their energy strategy is incompatible with the regulatory agenda. It's incompatible with their critical mineral strategy. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to include in the record, because Mr. Johnson's citing the importance of making sure that we have a supply chain that makes sense. And I'd like to think that U.S. objectives in terms of making sense when you think about ESG, if that's where we need to be going. This is a 2024 report by the United States Department of Labor that was prepared, obviously under the Biden administration, that cites the list of goods produced by child and forced labor around the globe. Pretty extensive. And what this does is it goes through and it shows that what we're doing is we're trading energy that could be produced domestically, creating jobs, higher environmental standards, appropriate labor standards, and I don't know, activity in the United States, economic activity in the United States. And we're trading it for labor that is forced in child labor in other countries that has lower environmental standards. Do we care about global environmental standards, or are we just going to sit here and put a blind eye and just bring in energy from other countries when they go and trash the environment? It doesn't make any sense from a global perspective. And I remind you, this year, highest emissions ever. And much of that is a result of the incredibly reckless, irresponsible, and inexperienced energy strategy out of this administration. It really is embarrassing to see folks sit here and come and advocate for things that results in more economic activity in other countries, a greater trade deficit, worse environmental outcomes, and increasing energy unaffordability in the United States. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Louisiana. I'd like to ask Dr. Williams, Ms. Lombard, and Mr. Travis 3 questions. I'd like for you to go in sequence and just give me your perspective on this. First, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Do I recognize myself? Yeah, I recognize you. Okay. I'd like to ask your perspective on this. I'm going to ask you a comparison question. I'm going to ask you, which country does a better job in adhering to the rule of law, China or the United States? Dr. Williams?
Well, I'm not a legal expert, but I think we do a pretty good job here in the United States.
Ms. Lombard?
Thank you for the question. United States.
Mr. Travis?
United States as well.
Next question. Which country does a better job in protecting human rights, China or the United States? Dr. Williams?
Well, again, I'm a geoscientist, but I think our common belief is that it's the United States.
Ms. Lombard?
The United States.
Mr. Travis?
United States.
Very good. I would say that's a pretty even comparison there, looking at what they do as far as the use of child labor and forced labor. Last question. Which country does a better job in protecting the environment? Dr. Williams, United States or China?
I think it's clear the United States.
Ms. Lombard?
The United States.
Mr. Travis?
United States of America.
Do you think today as we speak, when we look at the overall extraction and refinement of critical minerals and rare earth elements, where we see around the world that China has 70% of the extraction capability worldwide and 90% of the refining capability, and the United States is overly reliant on China to not only purchase minerals, but by the way, as we heard from Mr. Collins, and now what we hear also in recycling those materials, where we create a substance called black mass, where we take out the other components except the metals, and we say we're going to recycle that, and where do we send the black mass? We send it to China. So China can refine it and do what? Sell it back to us. Would you say, with the comparisons that we've just made with adherence to the rule of law, with the protection of human rights, with the protection of the environment, that the United States, if it continues to buy and rely on China for critical minerals and rare earth elements, seems like to me that we're supporting a country that doesn't adhere to the rule of law. We're supporting a country that doesn't abide by human rights. We're supporting the destruction of the environment. Would I be correct in reaching that assumption with your affirmative answers to those series of questions? Dr. Williams.
Certainly, those are all factors we have to take into account when we look at our trade in mineral commodities.
Very good. Ms. Lombard.
I would agree with your statement. It is not how the supply chain should work.
Very good. Mr. Travis.
Couldn't agree more, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Johnson and to Chairman Whiteclay if you'd like to reflect on the series of questions there and your perspective on that.
Thank you for the question, Representative. I think it's important, and I do agree that we probably do have some better environmental practices here in the United States, but in my experience on the ground in Montana, we got a long ways to go still. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that we should necessarily excuse some of the issues that we see across the world to do an okay job here. Mm-hmm. I can point to places in Montana just out my backyard where there's mines that are $20 million under bonded, So the Montana taxpayers are going to have to pick the bill up, and where a critical trout stream is about ready to turn into a waterfall right into that particular mine. These are on-the-ground impacts that shouldn't be happening, that we can fix, and we can do it in a way that causes for leadership in the United States to demonstrate that not only can we do it right, but we can do it in a way that's competitive across the world.
And the wherewithal is we have the will and the ability to do it versus China, which has no interest in doing it. So I would agree with your observation there. Chairman White Clay?
Yes, I agree with you, Chairman, on that the United States is and is a better choice for critical minerals. But as a casualty of the war on coal, I'm a former coal miner, and I have brothers and sisters in the union that mine palladium in Montana that 300 and close to 300 and something jobs are right now in jeopardy, and another 400 jobs were lost this past year in the palladium mine there. So as a coal miner and as a miner, we see the effects on heavy regulations, and my whole tribe is a casualty of the war on coal also. So I'm for better standards, but also at what cost?
Very good. I'd like to thank our witnesses. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today, for answering our questions, giving us your perspective on things. Very, very helpful as this committee considers the bills on the docket today. We thank you, and this subcommittee allows the members of the subcommittee to have additional questions for the witnesses, and if they do, we ask that you respond in writing to these questions that may not have been submitted to you today orally. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Friday, July 26th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you. Is it really July?